Your birthday might not be as harmless as you think. Studies show people are way more likely to die on or around their birthday. But why? Somewhere out there, our entire galaxy is being dragged through space towards something. What is it? Nobody knows. And there's a weird phenomena where ancient traits from long-dead ancestors can suddenly reappear. These are disturbing anomalies in science that shouldn't exist. Is your birthday coming up? Even worse, is it your birthday right now? Why do I say even worse? Well, you want to be careful. Ever heard of the birthday effect? Basically, researchers noticed something strange when they looked at millions of death records. People seem more likely to die on or right around their birthday. In Switzerland, one huge study found that deaths on someone's actual birthday were about 17% higher than normal. In the US, a study of 25 million deaths showed around 7% more people died on their birthday than expected. And this is nuts. In Ukraine, the numbers were even scarier. Men had a 44% higher chance of dying on their birthday. I mean, my God, I kind of dread my birthday like every year at this point in my life, but I don't think I'm actually gonna drop dead. Just that I'm one step closer to death, Apparently the Grim Reaper considers crashing your birthday party every year though. So why do they seem to be more deaths around people's birthdays? Well, increased risky behavior could be a factor. You're more likely to be out partying, but there's also stress. Birthdays can be a heavy reminder of aging, regrets, the fear of mortality, and for people already struggling, that can push them over the edge. Some terminally ill people even seem to hold on until their birthday, which then adds to the statistic. We don't really have a definitive reason though, but maybe there isn't one. It's likely a mix of all these things, but study after study across different countries and cultures, the pattern just keeps popping up, so happy birthday. Here's another thing that's pretty nuts. Our entire galaxy is being dragged through space by something we can't actually see. Back in the 70s, astronomers noticed that the Milky Way, along with thousands of other galaxies, aren't just drifting randomly. They're all moving in the same direction, like we are caught in some invisible current. And the spot they seem to be heading toward is what scientists call the Great Attractor. Again though, we can't actually see it. Our own galaxy blocks the view. In 2016 though, researchers using a massive radio telescope in Australia managed to peek past the Milky Way and spotted almost 900 galaxies packed into that area. That's a lot of gravitational pull right there, but some scientists think even those galaxies might just be victims as well, getting yanked in along with us. Imagine someone suddenly being born with especially large canine teeth. Our distant ancestors had these, but over time, as we've evolved, we don't really need them anymore. Now, our canines look pretty much like the rest of our teeth, but there's a strange phenomenon called atavism. This is where traits from our distant ancestors suddenly show up again, even though they've been gone for millions of years. The DNA for those old traits is still buried inside us, it's just kind of switched off. But every once in a while, something goes wrong in development and the switch flips back on. That's when you get rare cases like babies born with small tails, people with extra nipples, or unusually large ape-like teeth. It doesn't just happen in humans. Whales and dolphins, which evolved from land animals, have been found with tiny hind legs still forming inside their bodies. Birds, which are technically living dinosaurs, have been experimented on in labs where scientists managed to reactivate dormant genes and grow teeth in their beaks. Yeah, Jurassic Park doesn't seem as far-fetched now, does it? In a cave called Gran Dalia in northern Spain, researchers found some pretty unsettling ancient bones. One belonged to someone who would have been very young, and it had very specific cut marks on the neck. Not the kind you'd get from an accident, the kind that is left behind when someone's trying to strip flesh from a bone. Around a third of the human bones found in that same layer dated between 850,000 to 780,000 years ago. They all had similar signs: cut marks, smashed marrow bones, human bite marks in them. The species behind it was Homo antecessor, one of our early relatives, and based on what's been found, this kind of thing didn't just happen once. As for why they did it, could have been desperation, could have been a way to deal with rival groups. They targeted mostly juveniles, probably because they were easier pickings. When this research first came out, some scholars kind of tiptoed around it, but the team led by Jose Maria Bermudez de Castro has been finding the same patterns since the 90s, and in 2024, a new round of excavations confirmed it all over again, with better dating and clearer samples. In central Israel, at a site called Tin Shemet Cave, archaeologists found 5 human bodies that had been carefully buried. There were 2 full skeletons and 3 partial ones, and there's something about how they were placed. They were curled up in fetal positions, surrounded by red ochre and broken deer bones. It looks like there was meaning behind these burials. They hadn't just been, tossed into pits and covered with dirt. The cave was first excavated in 2016, but the big discoveries were announced in 2024 and published in early 2025. Researchers dated the remains to somewhere between 100,000 and 110,000 years ago, and that's kind of cool because it pushes back the idea of symbolic thinking way earlier than a lot of people expected. But the find didn't get the spotlight it probably deserved right away. Part of the reason is no one's sure who these people were. Some think they were early Homo sapiens, others say they could have been Neanderthals or something in between, but now, with more evidence and high-res scans of the cave layout, it's getting harder to ignore. Whether or not we know their exact species, these people were clearly thinking in ways most researchers didn't think they would be in that time period. In 1997, a German archaeologist claimed that he'd found Neanderthal bones near a volcano in Ochtenung, Germany. There was a jaw that was supposedly 165,000 years old. It got written up, it was put in museum displays, but years later, new tests showed something pretty embarrassing. Turns out the bone wasn't prehistoric at all. It was from a regular person who died in the early Middle Ages, and at least 21 other bones, all thought to be ancient, turned out to be nowhere near as old as they originally thought. And some of them were actually flat out fake. The man behind it, Axel von Berg, is now being investigated. It's looking like this wasn't just sloppy science. There might have been a real effort to fudge the evidence and make the site seem way older than it actually was. This went unchallenged for decades. The bones were cited in papers, taught about in schools, shown to tourists. Nobody questioned it until someone finally sent them out for proper dating. That's how deep some bad data can get buried. One of the strangest weather events you'll ever hear about is animals falling from the sky. Quite literally, when fish, frogs, spiders, the list goes on, fall out of the sky. Yes, you're more likely to hear stories like this from old nursery rhymes than, on the news, but there have actually been documented cases of this. In Honduras, for example, there's a yearly event called Rain of Fish, where after big storms, people claim to find fish scattered across the streets. Similar stories go way back. Pliny the Elder in ancient Rome wrote about frogs and fish falling from the sky. And in 1794, French soldiers swore they saw toads raining down during a storm. So how does this actually happen? The most common explanation is waterspouts or tornadoes. Basically, a tornado forms over water, sucks up, lightweight animals like fish or frogs, and then drops them miles away. The problem is, no one's actually seen that part happen, so it's still a theory. And it doesn't explain why it's usually just one type of animal falling, not like a mix of whatever else got caught up. Birds may play a role as well. Sometimes they drop fish mid-flight, which could explain more modern events like the 2021 fish rain in Texarkana, Texas, where people found chewed up fish all over their yards after a storm. I think that was a bit of a different situation though. Still, there are cases like frogs falling in England in the 80s that don't have such neat explanations. So, animal rain is still one of the weirdest natural mysteries in the world. In northern Australia, there's this strange cloud formation called the Morning Glory Cloud, and it shows up as a massive rolling tube that can stretch for hundreds of miles across the sky. It moves almost like a giant wave in the atmosphere. What's weird is, even with all the weather science we have, no one can fully explain this. Best guess is that it happens when sea breezes and humid air collide during the seasonal change from dry to wet. But even then, meteorologists can't actually predict when one will appear. To this day, we still don't have a solid scientific explanation. Every so often, people come across this strange goo on the ground after a heavy rain or following a meteor shower. It's called star jelly. It looks like these slimy, translucent blobs. Nobody actually knows what it is for sure. Some scientists think it might have something to do with frog or toad eggs, kind of like leftover spawn that's been disturbed. But it could also be a mix of algae, fungi, and bacteria. You'd think it'd be easy for scientists, to just grab a sample and then study it. But the problem is, the stuff vanishes before anyone can get a good look at it. It dries up or evaporates so fast that researchers are often left with nothing but a photo. In old stories, people believed it fell from the stars, hence the name. And even today, there are theories about it coming from space. Star jelly sometimes showing up after meteor showers. That definitely seems to lend itself to that idea. But, maybe aliens flying past Earth just have extra goo They gotta dump it somewhere every once in a while. There's a strange rare mushroom called the Devil's Cigar. You'll only ever find it in 2 places on Earth, a handful of counties in Texas, and a few forests in Japan. That is it. Scientists can't explain why it only shows up in these 2 spots. They're thousands of miles apart, and not to mention, I don't know about you, but I cannot think of 2 places more polar opposite than Japan and Texas. Nothing really scientific about that, I just thought I'd add. When this mushroom first grows, it looks like a dark shriveled cigar sticking out of the ground or from an old tree stump, but then it suddenly splits open with a sharp hissing sound, releasing a puff of smoky spores, and it spreads out in this star-like shape, earning it another nickname, the Texas star. DNA studies have shown that the Texas and Japanese populations of this fungus have been separated for nearly 19 million years. That means they've been growing apart on opposite sides of the planet since long before humans even existed. Why they survived in only those 2 places is still a total mystery. Back in 1883, long before anyone was talking about UFOs, a Mexican astronomer named Jose Bonilla spotted something so strange, people are still talking about it today, including me. He was at the Zacatecas Observatory studying sunspots, and suddenly he noticed dark shapes moving across the face of the sun. Hundreds of them. They were zipping by at a good clip too, all going in the same direction. Whatever they were, they definitely weren't normal. Bonilla did what any astronomer in his position would do. He grabbed his setup, basically a telescope with a bulky camera attached, and started snapping photos. By the time he was done, he documented over 300 of these things. He published his findings in a scientific journal, describing them as flying bodies. But he didn't make any wild claims, he just recorded what he saw. Explanations have poured in over the years. Maybe it was just geese flying really high, maybe clumps of dust or meteors passing by, but those explanations don't really add up, at least not enough for some scientists out there, because this case is still considered unsolved. One of the weirdest mysteries in space travel is something called the flyby anomaly. Basically, when a spacecraft swings by a planet like Earth to get a speed boost, it sometimes ends up moving slightly faster than scientists expect. It's tiny, fractions of a millimeter per second, but with the super precise tracking we do today, even that little bit is noticeable, and no one really knows why it happens. The first time anyone noticed this was back in 1990, when the Galileo spacecraft zipped past Earth. Engineers noticed the data didn't match their calculations, a small but clear speed bump that shouldn't have been there. Later missions like Near, Cassini, and Rosetta all reported similar strange increases, but not every flyby showed it. For instance, Messenger and Juno's flybys seemed normal, which has led some scientists to wonder if the effect has to do with Earth's rotation, or the exact path the spacecraft takes. Teams at NASA and other space agencies have combed through every possible explanation though, but nothing quite fits perfectly. And finally, we have the coronal heating problem. The sun's surface sits at about 6,000 kelvins, but its outer atmosphere, the corona, can reach millions of kelvins. The corona is way hotter than the surface, and by normal rules of heat, that just shouldn't happen, right? Heat naturally flows from hot to cold, not the other way around. So something unusual has to be transferring energy upward. The area where this crazy temperature jump happens is called the transition region, just a few tens to hundreds of kilometers thick. Scientists think 2 processes are most likely happening here. One idea is that waves moving through the sun's super hot charged gas could be carrying energy up. Another idea is that the sun's magnetic field sometimes twists so tightly that they snap, releasing tiny bursts of energy, like mini explosions that heat up the corona. But even with all this research, the coronal heating problem is still one of the biggest mysteries in space science. In the late 40s and early 50s, something kept showing up in the skies over New Mexico, specifically near places like Los Alamos and Sandia. Keep in mind, these were some of the most sensitive military sites in the country at the time. Military pilots and security staff, and then of course scientists, were all reporting the same thing, these large bright green balls of light moving across the night sky. Normal meteors burn orange or yellow and they leave a trail behind them. These were green, completely silent, and they left nothing. The military brought in Lincoln La Paz, a well-known meteor scientist, to look into it. He fairly quickly ruled out normal meteors. Regular meteors hit the atmosphere at a steep angle, and they burn up completely. These things were moving slower, flying completely flat and parallel to the ground, and again, left no fragments or impact craters on the ground. The military opened a secret investigation called Project Twinkle to figure out what was going on, but the fireballs eventually just stopped appearing before they could really figure anything out. They're still reported sporadically today, but they're super rare, and we still don't really know what they are. For hundreds of years, people have reported seeing glowing balls floating through the air during thunderstorms. Not like regular lightning that flashes and disappears. These things are about the size of a basketball, they hiss, and they glow in shades of blue, orange, or white, and then just slowly drift through the air for several seconds. People have described them passing straight through closed windows, floating down the aisles of planes, drifting into their own living rooms, before either hopefully vanishing or blowing up with a loud bang. Scientists brushed all this off as hallucinations or, just made up stories for a long time actually, but in 2012, Chinese researchers accidentally caught one on camera while studying regular lightning. When they looked at the data, they found silicon, iron, and calcium inside the glowing ball, the exact same stuff that's in dirt. That supported the idea that when lightning hits the ground, it vaporizes material in the soil and creates floating clouds of glowing particles. Again, very rarely, but still doesn't explain how one passes through a closed window without falling apart, or how it survives inside an airplane cabin. There are other theories: focused microwave radiation, electromagnetic fields forming a bubble of plasma, but none of them explain everything people have seen. Nobody has the full picture yet. In a rural valley in Norway called Hasdalen, people have been watching strange lights in the sky since at least the 1930s. Sometimes they're as bright as car headlights, hang in the air slowly swaying for over an hour. Other times they shoot across the sky and vanish in an instant. They were showing up so often in the 80s that scientists built a permanent station right there in the valley with cameras and radar just to study these things. And after decades of data, the lights are confirmed to be real. Radar shows they reflect signals back, meaning there's something physically there, not just, a weird visual trick. Temperature readings put them at around 8,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and tests show elements like scandium and titanium inside them. One theory is the valley works like a giant natural battery. The river running through it cuts across rocks made up of different types of minerals, building up a charge in the ground. Then, when radon gas seeps up from the underground, it could electrically charge the air enough to produce a glowing ball of light. Problem is, a ball of glowing energized air should burn itself out almost immediately, but these lights have been reported hanging around for minutes, even up to an hour or more, and that part nobody's figured out yet. For years, textbooks said the first humans arrived in North America about 13,000 years ago, during the last ice age. That was the Clovis model. But then scientists at White Sands National Park found something that didn't fit at all. Human footprints pressed into ancient mud that hardened into rock. And when they tested them, they turned out to be 21,000 to 23,000 years old, so way older than anyone thought people were even here. Some prints look like they were from teenagers, some were even younger, and a few ran alongside the tracks of giant sloths. But even after the first study came out in 2021, a lot of experts pushed back, saying the dating might be off. So the research team went back, tested again using completely different methods, and came back with the same answer. These prints were legit. For a while, the data just sat there because it didn't fit the standard narrative, but after 3 rounds of testing, nobody can really argue with it anymore. For a long time, people thought when humans showed up in the Americas, they hunted everything big to extinction, and that was that. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, they're all wiped out within a few thousand years. But newer evidence from places like Santa Helena Cave in Brazil tells a different story. Archaeologists found the bones of a giant ground sloth at the site, along with a few stone tools and polished sloth bones with little holes in them, probably for hanging on a string. The bones were still fresh when they were carved, which means people weren't digging them up long after the animal had died. They were using parts of it while it was still around. Similar finds have popped up in Uruguay, Chile, and the US. The more sites they look at, the more it seems like early humans and these giant prehistoric animals lived side by side for thousands of years. Obviously, they eventually died off, but the idea of this fast extinction right after humans arrived doesn't hold up anymore. The old story was simple, this version's Messier, but probably closer to the truth. In the early 1900s, a Czech archaeologist had a huge hold on what people believed about early humans in the Americas. His name was Aleš Hrdlicka. He worked at the Smithsonian, and he was adamant that humans hadn't been in the Americas for more than 3,000 years. Anything older, he was like, no, not possible. And because he was in charge of the biggest institutions in the field, his opinion carried a ton of weight. Even when archaeologists started digging up stuff that clearly looked older, like the Folsom Prints in New Mexico in 1927, where a group of archaeologists found these carefully shaped stone points buried directly alongside the bones of an extinct Ice Age bison in New Mexico. Obviously these were tools, and they were dated to about 10,000 years ago, but Hrdlicka completely dismissed them, and because nobody wanted to challenge the top guy at the Smithsonian, they kept quiet. It wasn't until decades later, when more discoveries piled up and dating methods got better, that researchers finally started speaking up. Turns out humans had been in the Americas way before 3,000 years ago, possibly even before 20,000. Hrdlicka may have not faked anything or hidden stuff like bones, but his influence basically put a halt to the conversation for a long time. A lot of early discoveries probably got ignored or tossed aside just because they didn't fit this guy's narrative. Back in 1912, a fossil collector named Charles Dawson showed up with a strange-looking skull that he said was found in Piltdown, England. It looked part human, part ape, and he claimed that it was the missing link. And the scientific world, they bought it. Museums displayed it, textbooks called it proof that modern humans evolved in Europe. But this skull was actually a cobbled-together mess. The skull was human, just a few hundred years old, and the jaw part was from an orangutan, and someone had stained the bones to make them look older. For over 40 years, nobody seriously challenged this. It wasn't until 1953 that scientists finally tested the bones using better dating methods, and they figured out the whole thing had been planted. Dawson is still the top suspect. He had a pattern of forging artifacts to boost his reputation. Definitely worked in this case. As far as hoaxes go, this one was pretty successful. It steered the whole field in the wrong direction for decades. It made researchers ignore legit fossils that didn't line up with the fake. In 2023, paleoanthropologist Lee Berger claimed a species called Homo naledi, who had small brains and lived around 250,000 years ago, was burying their dead and making cave art. That's a big deal, because we've always thought that kind of behavior only showed up in modern humans. The problem was, this was announced through a Netflix documentary before it got peer-reviewed, and a lot of scientists were not happy about this. They said the evidence for burials and engravings wasn't solid enough. There were no clear grave pits, no confirmed tool marks, no solid proof the markings were even made by Naledi. Some called it hype over science. In early 2025, another team took a closer look at the dirt around the bones, and they found no solid signs of grave pits. The stuff Berger's team said showed digging or burial didn't really check out when they tested it again. So now there was this debate in the research world. Was this a case of some rushed science, or was Berger knowingly trying to control the narrative? Sometimes when a new human species is discovered, the team that finds it basically locks everything down. They control the bones, the scans, the photos. If you're not part of their crew, good luck getting access. And that can go on for years. In the meantime, whatever story they tell about the fossil ends up becoming the official version, even if there are other ways to look at it. The issue is nobody else can check their work. Other scientists can't run their own tests or question the claims because they didn't have the material. So if someone does speak up, it's easy to shoot them down by saying, well, you haven't seen the bones yourself. It's not like a shady conspiracy necessarily, but it definitely slows things down, as you've seen. In 2001, researchers working in Chad found a skull called Tumai. It was about 7 million years old and thought to be one of the earliest human ancestors, maybe even the first one to walk upright. The find was huge, made headlines around the world, and it reshaped the timeline of when humans split from apes. But in 2004, the same team also found a femur, the upper leg bone, which would have told us for sure whether Tumai walked on two legs. And they didn't publish anything about it. Not in 2005, not in 2010, nothing until 2020, when another group of scientists finally studied it and said it looked more like a bone from something that walked on all fours. So why didn't the original team say anything about the femur? Why wasn't it included in the papers that claimed Tumai walked on two legs? Researchers who finally spoke up said the leg bone didn't really fit that story. Maybe that's why it got got left out.
In 1953, the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission launched a study to measure how much radioactive strontium-90 from nuclear testing was making its way into the human food supply. The problem was that strontium-90 accumulates in bone tissue, particularly in growing bones. So researchers needed bone samples from growing people. Over the next several years, scientists collected more than 1,500 bone samples from young people who had passed in hospitals across the United States, Canada, Europe, Australia, and South America. The bones were analyzed for strontium-90 without the knowledge or consent of the parents. The parents were told the remains were being handled for routine purposes. They were not told the bones were being shipped to laboratories for nuclear fallout research. The project was eventually exposed in the 1990s, and the government apologized. The data was real, the science was real, the way they got the samples was something nobody should have ever signed off on. In the 1950s and 60s, the CIA operated a program out of Istanbul, Turkey, where they tested experimental interrogation techniques on foreign nationals who had no idea they were being used as test subjects. The program was part of the broader MK-Ultra umbrella, but this specific operation targeted people at overseas locations where US legal protections didn't apply and oversight was essentially non-existent. Subjects were given illicit substances, including LSD and other experimental compounds, without their knowledge, and then interrogated to test whether chemical substances could force compliance, extract information, or erase memory. The full scope of what happened in Istanbul remains classified. What is known comes from partially declassified documents and the testimony of a handful of operatives. From 1955 to 1975, the U.S. Army Chemical Corps conducted classified human subject research at the Edgewood Arsenal facility in Maryland. Over 20 years, roughly 7,000 soldiers were used as test subjects. They were told they were participating in routine equipment testing, but what actually happened was that they were exposed to LSD, BZ, which is a powerful deliriant that causes hallucinations lasting up to 3 days, sarin nerve gas, VX, and other chemical agents. Many were not told what they had been given until after the experiments were over. Some were never told at all. Soldiers reported severe psychological effects lasting years. The program was finally shut down in 1975 after an Army Inspector General's report concluded that informed consent procedures had been inadequate. The full records were classified for decades. When they were partially declassified, many veterans who had been tested on didn't even know what had happened to them until they read about it in a newspaper. From 1962 to 1973, the U.S. Department of Defense conducted a series of classified tests known as Project SHAD, Shipboard Hazard and Defense. The purpose was to determine how vulnerable U.S. Navy warships were to chemical and biological weapons attacks. Over the course of the program, more than 5,000 military personnel, mostly Navy and Marine Corps, were exposed to live chemical and biological warfare agents, including sarin nerve gas, VX, and the bacteria that causes Q fever. The soldiers were not told what they were being exposed to. They were told these were routine operational tests. Some were standing on deck when aerosolized agents were sprayed over their ships. Others were inside sealed compartments when the agents were pumped through ventilation systems. The government denied the program's existence for 3 decades. When Project SHAD was finally declassified in the early 2000s, many of the veterans who had been tested on didn't learn what had happened to them until they read about it in a newspaper. Yes, this is just like the last one. Clearly, people don't learn.
Sometimes a bird watcher will spot a half and half bird. Say a northern cardinal, for example. The entire right side of the body is bright red and the entire left is brown. It looks like 2 different birds fused together straight down the middle. A bilateral gynandromorph, which means half its body is genetically male and the other half is genetically female. Starts with the very first cell division after the egg is fertilized. Normally, when that cell splits in 2, both new cells get identical genetic information, but sometimes mistake happens, and the chromosomes get divided unevenly. So one cell ends up with male chromosomes, the other ends up with female ones. From that point on, each cell builds its half of the bird using its own instructions, so to speak. The male cells build the right side, the female cells build the left side. That split goes all the way through the body, including the internal organs. The bird can have male bits on one side and an ovary on the other. Next up, we have Stumpy the four-legged duck, which sounds like a cartoon character, but this is actually a real case. In 2007, a duckling hatched on a farm in Hampshire, England, with 4 legs. The owners called him Stumpy. He had his own normal working legs up front and a second pair growing right behind them. They were smaller and they don't actually function, but they were there. This is called polymylia, which just means extra limbs. It happens when the embryo basically gets garbled instructions about where to grow limbs while it's still developing. Most animals born this way don't make it. The extra limbs are just a problem. They drag, they get caught. But Stumpy was different. His extra legs were small enough and positioned just right that they didn't really stop him from walking or swimming, so he grew up normally alongside the other ducks. One of the extra legs eventually got snagged on a fence and had to be removed by a vet, but otherwise, he was completely healthy. There's a rare hereditary skin condition called epidermal dysplasia verruciformis. You might have seen photos of people with this. It's usually just referred to as the tree man disease. To get it, a person has to inherit a broken copy of a specific gene from both parents. If only one parent passes it down, it doesn't show up, so this is very rare, thankfully. The genes involved are called EVER1 and EVER2. Their job is to help the immune system recognize and fight off a virus called human papillomavirus, HPV. Most people carry some version of HPV, and their bodies deal with it without any issues. But when EVER1 and EVER2 are both broken, the immune system doesn't recognize the virus at all. So the virus moves into the skin cells and forces them to produce massive amounts of keratin, the same tough protein that makes up our fingernails. So with nothing to stop it, keratin builds up into these thick, rough, almost bark-like growths, mostly on the hands and feet. Doctors have to surgically remove them. Two-headed animals are called polycephalic, and they show up most often in reptiles, snakes especially, and sometimes turtles. It's not caused by pollution or anything in the environment, though. The process is almost identical to what creates identical twins in humans. So when a fertilized egg starts developing, it's supposed to split fully into 2 separate embryos. If that split starts but doesn't finish, the cells just keep growing anyway, connected. The result is one body with 2 heads. Each head has its own brain, its own eyes, but they share everything below the neck. So the same heart, the same lungs, the same digestive system. In the wild, they almost never survive because it's basically 2 different snakes fused together, and they often just can't cooperate with each other. Makes escaping from predators a bit of a problem if they both want to slither in a different direction. In captivity, scientists have kept them alive for years though, but one well-documented behavior, at feeding time, they've had to put physical barriers between the 2 heads because snakes have been known to fight over the same piece of food. Neither one understands that the food's gonna end up in the exact same stomach regardless. In 2019, a fisherman on Lake Champlain pulled in a trout that looked totally normal at first, but when she went to take the hook out, she noticed the fish had a second mouth right below the first one. Photos started spreading online. People assumed that maybe it was edited. Biologists looked at it and they confirmed the fish was real though. Sometimes a fish survives an old hook injury where the jaw tears open and then heals in an unusual shape which can look like a second mouth. But a case where a sort of second mouth forms during development, that's pretty rare. What surprised scientists though was the fact that the fish was a full-grown adult. A second opening in the throat usually causes real problems with breathing through the gills, or it just makes it nearly impossible for them to swallow food. This one had gotten around both those problems though, which isn't something anyone was expecting. Regular lightning is hard to miss. Bright flash, loud crack, done. But there's another kind happening inside the same storms that you can't see at all. It's called dark lightning. It's basically invisible blasts of gamma radiation shooting up out of thunderclouds and into space. The same type of radiation that comes from nuclear explosions and dying stars. It was happening above our heads that whole time, and nobody knew about it until the 90s, when satellites built to study deep space started picking up bursts coming from down on Earth. Each burst lasts only a couple milliseconds, but the energy involved is crazy. The way it works is that the electric field inside a thundercloud kinda acts like a particle accelerator, pushing electrons up to nearly the speed of light. When those electrons crash into regular air atoms, they release gamma rays. The problem is that according to everything scientists know about how thunderstorms work, the electric fields inside clouds shouldn't be strong enough to make that happen on their own. Something else has to be triggering it. Because it all happens invisibly inside the core of a storm, that missing piece has been very hard to find though. For years, photographers in Canada kept capturing something in the night sky that looked sort of like an aurora, but wasn't. Instead of the bright green you get with the northern lights, for example, this was a narrow strip of purple light stretching thousands of miles across the sky. It also showed up much further south than auroras normally do. They call it Steve. Eventually those photos made it to scientists who realized this was not an unusual aurora, it was something that had never been documented before. In 2018, researchers matched up photos of Steve with data from a satellite that passed directly through it at the same time. Auroras form when charged particles from the sun rain down to the upper atmosphere and make air molecules glow. But when the satellite flew through Steve, there were no particles coming down at all. What it found instead was a fast-moving river of extremely hot gas tearing through the upper atmosphere, temperatures over 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The glow isn't from particles hitting the air, it's from friction. The gas is moving so fast that it heats everything around it until it lights up. So scientists know what Steve is, what they still don't know is exactly what triggers it. At the top of a large thunderstorm cloud that's still building, you can sometimes see a streak or patch of light that starts moving on its own. It moves so fast and erratically that it genuinely looks like something is sweeping a massive spotlight across the sky. It's called a crown flash. Scientists know the basic idea behind it. The tops of big storm clouds are packed with tiny, needle-shaped ice crystals. When sunlight hits them at the right angle, they act a bit like mirrors, bouncing the light back towards your eyes. Normally those crystals float in random directions, but a building thunderstorm creates a powerful electric field that forces all of them to line up at once. When lightning fires inside the cloud and the field suddenly shifts, all the crystals pivot at the exact moment and the reflected light whips across the sky. That makes sense. The big question is what creates the perfect conditions for the really weird ones. The lights that spin around, move on their own, and keep going for a long time. Scientists still don't have a satisfying answer for that. And more on lightning. Regular lightning is only part of what's going on during a big thunderstorm. High above the clouds, or at the edge of space, completely separated electrical discharges are firing off all the time. Sprites are massive jellyfish-shaped bursts of red light that can stretch 30 miles across. Blue jets are narrow cones of blue light shooting upward from the tops of clouds. Elves are faint rings that expand outward over 200 miles wide. They're all real. They're all happening above the storms you'd be watching from the ground. Because they take place miles above the clouds and last just a few milliseconds, though, they're extremely hard to study. Scientists know they're giant bursts of electricity that happen high above thunderstorms. Beyond that, there's still a lot they don't understand. Out of the thousands of storms happening around the world at any given time, only a handful produce these flashes. Nobody knows exactly what makes those storms different. They also still can't explain why they come in so many different shapes or how all the energy can travel through thin air that high up without fading away. Regular clouds form in the lowest layer of the atmosphere, topping out at about 10 miles up. Noctilucent clouds form 50 miles up in a layer called the mesosphere, where it's incredibly cold. They're too thin to see during the day, but in summer, after the sun has gone down below the horizon, it lights them up from below, and what you get is this faint electric blue glow. They're made of tiny ice crystals that form around dust particles, often from meteors burning up as they enter the atmosphere. That part scientists are fairly confident about, but there's something weird going on as well. They used to be rare, mostly stuck near the poles, but over the last few decades, they started showing up more often, getting brighter, appearing much farther south than before. One idea is that all the methane from all our human activity is breaking down higher up and creating extra water vapor, which gives these clouds more to work with, but they're still not 100% sure. Most people picture auroras as these bright waves of green, red, and purple light moving across the sky near the poles, but sometimes you'll see something strange inside them. Dark patches that move through the glow. And no, not just talking about empty gaps in the light. These dark patches have clean edges, and again, they move. Normally, auroras happen when particles from the sun hit the upper atmosphere and make the air light up. The idea behind these dark shapes is that in certain spots, something interrupts that process. Instead of energy building up and glowing, it gets pulled away. So those areas go dark while everything around them is still shining. But researchers still don't fully understand why this happens. These don't come from inside our atmosphere, they come from across the universe. Fast radio bursts are intense pulses of radio waves that travel millions or even billions of light years to reach us. A single burst lasts a fraction of a millisecond, and in that tiny window it releases as much energy as the sun puts out over an entire year. They're so short and unpredictable, you need radio telescopes scanning the sky around the clock to detect them. For a long time, there was no good explanation for what could release that much energy that fast. Then things got more complicated when scientists found that some FRBs are one-time events, while others are repeaters, firing from the exact same spot in space multiple times over days or months. Some bursts have been tracked back to magnetars, which are extremely dense dead stars with magnetic fields trillions of times stronger than Earth's. That explains some of them, but certainly not all. Some repeating bursts fire on a perfectly predictable schedule. Others show wave patterns that don't match magnetars at all. Where those are coming from is still completely unknown. Right after the Fukushima nuclear disaster happened in 2011, a group of Japanese researchers, led by a scientist named Joji Otaki, decided to study some of the local wildlife. They wanted to see what effect the radiation was having. They picked a tiny, super common insect called the pale grass blue butterfly. When they caught the first batch near the accident site, they noticed a few weird things right away. Some had dented eyes, others had crumpled wings, and a few had malformed antennae. The real discovery happened when they brought these butterflies back to a clean lab away from the radiation. They bred them to see what would happen to their babies. In the next generation, the number of physical deformities didn't go down, doubled. The researchers realized the radiation had permanently damaged the butterflies' blueprints. The eggs in the host plants that they ate were full of fallout, and that damage was being passed down directly from parent to offspring. In 2011, a fisherman in the Gulf of California named Enrique Lucerno Leon caught a pregnant dusky shark. When he cut it open, one of the fetuses inside looked totally wrong. It was pure white, while all its siblings were normal gray. Oh, and another small detail. Right in the center of its forehead was a single large eye, like a cyclops. Instead of tossing it, he handed it over to marine scientists at National Geographic. They ran x-rays and tests to make sure it wasn't a fake. Of course, it was completely real. The shark had a condition called cyclopia. Normally, very early in development, the brain is supposed to divide into two halves, and each half forms one eye. In this shark, that split never happened. The brain stayed whole, so there was only one eye socket to form right in the middle. Animals born this way don't survive long. They can't swim properly or hunt, so they're incredibly rare as is, and even rarer to find. The specimen let scientists get a closer look at exactly what it looks like when that basic step of development goes wrong. Deep under Texas, inside the cave systems of the Edwards Aquifer, there's a fish called the toothless blind cat. It lives hundreds of feet underground in complete darkness. It's developed into what it is today over the course of millions of years. It has no eyes at all. Not blind eyes, I mean no eyes. Skin just grows right over the spots where the eyes would normally develop. There's no point in building eyes down there, so the body just stopped doing it. The fish also has zero pigment in its skin, which makes it completely see-through. You can look at one and see its organs, its blood vessels, pretty much everything. I mean, it kind of looks like a raw chicken cutlet. It's not exactly pretty, but it's cool. Scientists find it especially interesting because it shows something counterintuitive. I mean, being completely blind sounds like a pretty major flaw, but in a pitch black cave, having eyes is just a waste of energy. The body eventually stops spending resources on something useless, so the fish is better off for it. You'll also find other pale blind creatures down there, like the Texas blind salamander, and there are other similar eyeless catfish found in Mexico. Yeah, technically this is not a mutation, it's an evolutionary thing, but it's still pretty strange. In late 2015, a hunter near Preston, Idaho shot a mountain lion. When he got close to look at it, he found something growing out of the left side of the animal's forehead. A hard, white mass with a fully formed set of teeth inside it, and whiskers growing out the outside. He turned it over to biologists at the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, and when they studied the skull, they came up with two explanations, and they weren't really able to rule either one out completely. The first was a teratoma, a type of tumor made of cells that can grow into almost anything: hair, bone, teeth. They sometimes show up in completely wrong places on the body, so that seems to fit pretty well. But the second theory was that the lion had started out as a conjoined twin. If a twin stops developing early in pregnancy and gets absorbed back into the surviving animal, sometimes there are remnants of the twin left behind, in this case, a jaw. Either way, the lion had been walking around in the wild for years with this extra set of teeth on its forehead, but it seemed healthy until the hunter got to it. Belgian blue cattle look like pro bodybuilders. Their shoulders and hindquarters are enormous, packed with crazy muscle. They look almost nothing like regular cows. That's not from a special feed or anything farmers are doing. It comes down to one missing protein. In a normal animal, the body makes something called myostatin. Its job is to tell the muscles when to stop growing. Think of it as a shut-off switch. When the body has enough muscle, myostatin kicks in. It's just like, that's enough. But Belgian blues have a mutation where the gene that makes myostatin is either missing or broken, so the switch never flips. And the muscles just keep building and multiplying with nothing to stop them, which is where the term double muscling comes from. They end up with far more muscle fibers than normal. Geneticists study these animals because the same basic system exists in humans. Researchers can figure out how to work around myostatin safely. It could open up treatments for people with muscle deficiencies. What you're looking at here is footage from a NASA mission in 1991 showing multiple objects leaving Earth's atmosphere. Video came from Space Shuttle Discovery during mission STS-48, and for more than 30 years, people have argued over what's actually in the footage. Some think it's just ice particles drifting near the shuttle. Others think one of the objects moves in a way that simply should not be possible. The clip was recorded on September 15th, 1991, while Discovery was orbiting Earth. You could see several glowing objects floating above the planet before one suddenly changes direction after a bright flash appears on screen. That moment is what turned this into one of the most famous NASA UFO videos ever recorded. Even today, people still slow the footage down frame by frame, trying to figure out what's going on here. Former NASA engineer James Oberg argued the objects were, quote, routine nearby small sunlit debris and got pushed around when shuttle thrusters fired. NASA stuck with that explanation for years, saying the camera was just capturing ice particles reacting to exhaust bursts. Not everyone bought it. Physicist Jack Kasher studied the footage and rejected the idea that the objects were tiny bits of ice flat out, writing that the main object, quote, clearly accelerated and moved above the Earth's airglow, adding that if the normal explanations fail, it would have been an intelligently directed craft. Even on Reddit today, people still argue over whether the flash was just a thruster firing or something stranger. One commenter called it, quote, genuinely one of the most bizarre-looking NASA space videos. In August of 2020, Russian cosmonaut Ivan Wagner was on the ISS recording a time-lapse of the Aurora Australis over Antarctica. Well, something odd floats into the frame. For a few seconds, 5 small objects appear moving together in a tight formation. Wagner shared the footage online and asked, what do you think those are? Meteors, satellites, or ... He also reported it to Roscosmos leadership. The clip was then sent for review to both the Central Research Institute of Machine Building and the Space Research Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Roscosmos publicly described the footage as, quote, interesting and at the same time mysterious. The time-lapse was captured at 1 frame per second, meaning the full observation window lasted about 52 seconds. Roscosmos spokesman Vladimir Ostemenko said it was too early to make conclusions and that the specialists would need to analyze it further. As of now, though, we still don't have an official explanation. In 2016, viewers watching the ISS live feed noticed something unusual in the distance. The camera normally shows a calm view of Earth, but suddenly this orb appears far away. It looks like it's falling toward Earth, almost like a meteor entering the atmosphere, but it quickly becomes clear that this is not a meteor. The object stops mid-descent and just hovers in place place for a few seconds. Before anyone could really process what was happening, the live stream cut out. A YouTuber known as StreetCap1, who often uploads odd International Space Station footage, shared the clip and pointed out how suspicious the timing was. NASA later said it was probably just space debris or a satellite, but was that really the case? Were they covering something up? Well, take a look at this. What you're looking at here is footage from that same live feed, this one from another angle, and this feed didn't cut out. As you can see, the orb descends and hovers in place for a while. What happened after the feed most people were watching cut out though? Well, it flew back up and then zipped off in another direction. We'll play the clip. Keep in mind this is at 2 times the speed. Look at how controlled the movement is. It doesn't look like it's something just drifting in space. It seems to have controlled movement. Would space junk or a satellite descend, hover in place, then fly back up and zoom off like that? Yeah, I don't think so. What is this thing then? No idea, but it's definitely stranger than they tried to make it out to be. This clip comes from a 2006 CNN broadcast covering a space shuttle mission. First, there's an external tank from Space Shuttle Atlantis that's visible, which is not part of the anomaly. The strange part appears later. Take a look at this. Notice the glowing triangular shape moving across the frame? It passes quickly, it's only visible for a brief moment, but it definitely stands out against the dark background of space. YouTuber John Chaser re-uploaded the footage and commented, "This video is not a fake. I simply downloaded it off the NASA website and reposted it here. It's still on their server." What exactly is it though? I'll let you guys be the judge. Share your thoughts down in the comments. This footage comes from the Space Shuttle Endeavour's STS-88 mission in December of 1998, during early construction work on the International Space Station. Astronauts were outside the shuttle installing thermal blankets when one of them came loose. Commander Robert Cabana radios, "Jerry, one of the thermal covers got away from you." Images from the mission show the object drifting away in orbit. NASA later cataloged it and said it eventually burned up in Earth's atmosphere a few days later. Footage and images didn't settle the debate fully. Some viewers argued the object doesn't look like ordinary space debris, saying that NASA was clearly hiding something. Over time, it became linked to the Black Knight satellite theory, which claims the object is actually evidence of an ancient alien satellite that's supposedly been orbiting Earth for thousands of years. And the story has some pretty weird roots. Part of it traces back to strange radio signals picked up in the 50s, before we'd even launched anything into orbit. Nobody could explain them at the time, and that's kind of where the theory started forming. From there, it just kept snowballing. A few random sightings, some odd signal patterns. There's never one big official discovery. It was more like all these scattered puzzle pieces that slowly got pulled into that one theory.
All right, news of this just came out last month. Scientists at the Large Hadron Collider have just detected something that could officially break our current understanding of physics. Quite the statement, so let's dive in. So they've been digging into some incredibly rare subatomic transformations called electroweak penguin decays. It sounds funny, but it's a real term. As the researchers stated, quote, "The term penguin refers to a specific type of decay of short-lived particles. In this case, we study how the B meson decays into 4 other subatomic particles, a kaon, a pion, and 2 muons. With some imagination, one can visualize the arrangement of the particles involved as looking like a penguin." End quote. This specific transformation is ridiculously rare in nature. The researchers explain that, quote, "For every million B mesons, only 1 will decay in this manner. Because it's so rare, it's the perfect place to look for anomalies. If there are weird, undiscovered heavy particles floating around the universe that we can't see, they'd alter the math of this decay process. That is exactly what happened. The team tracked approximately 650 billion B meson decays, isolated the penguin events, and hit a major wall. The physics didn't add up. Basically, the particles are flying off at angles and energy levels they shouldn't be capable of. There's a tiny chance this is a statistical fluke, but it's also very likely we're looking at brand new physics. According to this news story, I'm not a scientist, in case you haven't already guessed that. For decades, physicists were missing something. They had this big theory that explained how particles work, how they interact, why they behave the way they do, But there was a hole in it. One particle that the whole thing predicted should exist, but nobody had ever actually found. They called it the Higgs boson, and in 2012, CERN finally found it. Years of work, billions of dollars, and the thing was real, exactly where they thought it would be. Big moment, but then people did the math on it. Specifically, they took the mass they measured and ran it through equations that described the energy state of empty space, and the results were a little alarming. The way it's been described is this. Imagine a ball sitting in a small dip on a hillside. It's not rolling anywhere, so it seems stable. But it's not at the bottom of the hill. There's a lower point further down. Our universe might be like that ball, sitting still, looking fine, but not actually in the most stable state it could be in. If that's true, then at some random point, a tiny patch of space could flip into that lower state, and that patch would expand outward at close to the speed of light. The physics inside it would be completely different from the physics we know. Anything it passed through just wouldn't exist anymore in a recognizable way. Now, the math also says this would take longer than the current age of the universe to happen. So, not really something we need to worry about, thankfully, but the unsettling part is that just before they found the Higgs, this was just hypothetical. Protons and neutrons aren't actually solid little balls. They're made of even smaller things called quarks, which are normally stuck together and can't be separated under ordinary conditions. But if you get things hot enough, those quarks become loose. You end up with this hot soup of free quarks all swirling around together. They say that's what existed in the very first moments after the Big Bang, and CERN's ALICE experiment has been recreating it by smashing heavy atoms together at incredible speeds. Before they actually did this, most people assumed the soup would behave like a gas, with particles bouncing around loosely, not really connected to each other. Totally reasonable assumption, but it was wrong. The soup moved like a liquid, almost no resistance, incredibly smooth flow, better than water, actually. Almost no friction at all. For something made of the most fundamental building blocks of matter, running at insane temperatures, that was genuinely shocking. And what it means is that the very early universe was more like a fast-moving, incredibly smooth liquid. That may be a hard image to get your head around, because it certainly is for me. Since the 60s, the understanding was pretty simple. Quarks come in two types. You can have three stuck together, that's what protons and neutrons are, or you can have two paired up, which makes a different kind of particle. Those were the options. People had speculated that other combinations might exist, but after 50 years, nobody had ever seen one. Then an experiment at CERN called LHCb was watching a heavy particle break apart, tracking where all the pieces went, and they kept seeing a pattern that didn't fit. The signal was clear enough that they couldn't explain it away. After a lot of checking and rechecking, the conclusion was that they were looking at a particle made of 5 quarks. That might not sound all that dramatic to us, but for the researchers, this was a very big revelation. They'd never seen this before. And then the question became, were these 5 quarks all tightly fused? Or was it more like 2 separate particles that had just happened to be clinging to each other? That argument is still going. In our number 10 spot, we have the submerged temples of Mahabalipuram. Imagine strolling along the golden sands near India's Palar River, where the whispers of ancient legends seem to float on the sea breeze. According to local lore, 7 magnificent temples once graced this coastline, but 6 were claimed by the ocean's depths long ago. For centuries, these tales remained just that, stories passed down through generations. Then, in 2004, something extraordinary happened. When the Indian Ocean tsunami caused the waters to recede dramatically, astonished onlookers glimpsed submerged structures emerging from the sea, a fleeting reveal of what might be the lost temples of Mahabalipuram. Since that day, archaeologists have been diving into this underwater world, uncovering intricately carved stone known remnants that hint at a grand past. But the ocean guards its secrets closely, and the full extent of these submerged ruins is still a captivating mystery. Could there be more waiting to be discovered beneath the waves? In our number 9 spot today, we have the River Wharf's Strid. At first glance, the Strid on England's River Wharf looks like a charming narrow stream, hardly something to be wary of. But beneath its serene surface lies a deadly secret. This innocent-looking stretch is where the river dramatically constricts from a broad, shallow flow into a deep, tight channel. The water's speed increases, creating powerful undercurrents and hidden caverns that have swallowed countless victims over the years. What's chilling is that those who fall in are rarely seen again, and the exact nature of the underwater hazards remains a mystery because it's too dangerous to explore. How can something so peaceful looking be so perilous? The Strid serves as a haunting reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that nature often guards its secrets well beneath the surface. In our number 8 spot today, we have the giant catfish of Mekong. Imagine cruising along the majestic Mekong River in Southeast Asia when suddenly you realize that beneath the calm surface swims a creature straight out of legend. Meet the Mekong giant catfish, one of the world's largest freshwater fish. This colossal catfish can grow up to 3 meters long, that's about 10 feet, and it weighs as much as 300 kilograms or 660 pounds. But here's the catch. Despite its enormous size, we know surprisingly little about it. Scientists are baffled by its mysterious behavior, obscure breeding habits, and the secret behind its extraordinary growth. Is it something unique in the river's ecosystem, a genetic quirk? With overfishing and habitat loss pushing this gentle giant toward the brink of extinction, unlocking its secrets has never been more urgent. So we're back at the Mekong River. Picture yourself in Thailand during a warm October evening, surrounded by the buzz of thousands of spectators. Suddenly, glowing orbs of light, known as the Naga fireballs, begin to rise silently from the water's surface, floating up into the night sky before disappearing. It is a breathtaking sight that blurs the lines between reality and myth. Locals believe these mysterious fireballs are the breath of the Naga, a mythical serpent revered in Buddhist lore. Scientists, on the other hand, are scratching their heads. Theories abound, from combustible gases released by the riverbed to optical illusions, but none have been definitively proven. Is it a natural phenomenon we don't yet fully understand, or is there a touch of magic in the air? Whatever the cause, witnessing the Naga fireballs is an unforgettable experience that leaves you pondering the mysteries our world still holds. In our number 6 spot today, we have the submerged ruins of Lion City. Imagine slipping beneath the tranquil surface of China's Qiandao Lake and descending into a hidden world frozen in time. There lies Xichen, or Lion City, an ancient metropolis built during the Eastern Han Dynasty between 25 and 200 CE. This city wasn't lost to natural disaster or forgotten over millennia. It was intentionally submerged in 1959 to create a hydroelectric dam, forming the man-made Qiandao Lake. What is absolutely fascinating is how remarkably well preserved the city remains underwater. Divers exploring Lion City are treated to a surreal journey through ancient streets and buildings, all beneath 40 meters or about 130 feet of water.
From 1951 to 1974, that's 23 years, researchers from the University of Pennsylvania used inmates at Holmesburg Prison as test subjects. They paid them a few dollars, they exposed them to chemical warfare agents, radioactive isotopes, hallucinogens, and experimental cosmetics. One researcher, Dr. Albert Kligman, famously said, and I'm quoting, "All I saw before me was acres of skin. The inmates developed rashes, burns, and long-term health problems that followed them for life." The program ran for over 2 decades before it was finally exposed and shut down in 1974. When you hear about informed consent in modern medicine, this is one of the reasons why. Because for 23 years at Holmesburg, it didn't exist at all. In 1967, a Palo Alto high school teacher named Ron Jones wanted to teach his students about fascism, so he invented a movement, complete with a salute, a slogan, membership cards, and strict rules about who could join. What was supposed to last one day turned into an entire week, because the students didn't just participate, they became true believers. They started policing each other's behavior, reporting rule breakers, recruiting others. By day 4, over 200 students had joined what they genuinely believed was a national political movement. Jones realized he hadn't just taught fascism, he had accidentally built it inside a California high school. On day 5, he gathered everyone in an auditorium, revealed it was all an experiment, and showed them footage of Nazi rallies. He never repeated it and later described it as one of the most terrifying experiences of his life. I feel like if your lesson plans ends with you becoming scared of your own students, maybe you took a wrong turn somewhere. In 1939, speech pathologist Wendell Johnson gathered 22 orphan children in Iowa. Half of them spoke perfectly normally. That didn't matter. For months, he and his team told them that they had severe speech problems, that their stuttering was getting worse, that they should avoid speaking unless they could do it perfectly. He was trying to prove that stuttering was learned, not biological, so he actively tried to create it, and he succeeded. Several of them who had never stuttered in their lives developed lifelong speech disorders. The study was never published. Johnson buried it. It didn't surface until 2001 when the University of Iowa finally issued an apology, over 60 years later. Okay, thanks, I guess, real timely. In 1963, neuroscientist Jose Delgado stood alone in a bull ring in Spain. Fully grown fighting bull was released and charged directly at him. Delgado had implanted an electrode into the bull's brain, specifically into the caudate nucleus, which controls aggression and movement. He pressed a button on a radio transmitter, the bull skidded to a halt, turned away, completely docile. He had literally stopped a charging bull with a remote control. Delgado called it the stimoceiver and believed brain implants could cure everything from epilepsy to aggression. Then he started thinking about what a government might do with that technology. Remote-controlled soldiers, pacified populations, and essentially walked away from his own discovery. He spent the rest of his career warning about the very thing he had invented, which sounds a lot like a sci-fi villain origin story, except he was the one who said, okay, maybe don't. In 1950, the US Navy conducted a biological warfare simulation off the coast of San Francisco. They loaded ships with massive quantities of two bacteria, Serratia marcescens and Bacillus globigii, and they sprayed them into the air over the city. Their goal was to see how a biological weapon would disperse through a populated area. They tracked the bacteria spreading across the entire Bay Area. Then, within weeks, 11 patients at Stanford Hospital developed serious Serratia infections. One of them died. The Navy denied everything. It wasn't until 1976, 26 years later, that the truth came out. The military had literally germ warfare tested its own citizens without telling anyone, without consent, without a single warning. Isn't history so fun? For 17 years, from 1978 to 1995, the CIA and US Army ran a top-secret program investigating whether psychic abilities could be used for military intelligence. They called it remote viewing. They hired people who claimed they could see locations, objects, and events thousands of miles away using only their mind. They tasked them with locating hostages, describing secret Soviet facilities, and predicting future events. The project burned through over $20 million. In 1995, the CIA declassified the program and released a report concluding that remote viewing had failed to produce actionable intelligence. The program was shut down, but here's the thing. Several of the remote viewers insist to this day that some of their reports were disturbingly accurate. The files are public now, but heavily redacted. So the question isn't whether the government believed in psychics. The question is what's still blacked out and why they kept running it for almost 2 decades if it didn't work.
At our number 5 spot today, we have the bottomless lake of lost souls. Now, if you're up for a real adventure, let me take you to the remote and rugged Nahanni River Valley in Canada.
a place so shrouded in mystery it's earned the ominous nickname Valley of the Headless Men. Among its many secrets is a so-called bottomless lake that local legends says swallows anyone who gets too close. Over the years, there have been tales of unexplained disappearances and even headless bodies found along the riverbanks, fueling stories of vengeful spirits or hidden dangers lurking in the wilderness. Is it the treacherous terrain and natural hazards playing tricks on intrepid explorers, or is there something more sinister at work? The area is so remote and difficult to navigate that much of it remains unexplored, keeping its dark mysteries intact. For those fascinated by the unknown, the Nahanni River Valley is both a dream and a dare. In our number 4 spot today, we have the underwater anomalies of Cuba. Imagine you're part of a research team scanning the ocean floor off Cuba's western coast when your sonar equipment picks up something unbelievable. At depths of around 700 meters or 2,300 feet, there appear to be structures that look strikingly like ancient urban ruins, symmetrical stone formations, and even shapes resembling pyramids. It's like stumbling upon a sunken city straight out of legend. Some people are buzzing with excitement, speculating that these could be remnants of a lost civilization that time forgot. Others urge caution, suggesting that Mother Nature might just be playing tricks with natural geological formations that mimic man-made structures. The mystery is thick, and the challenge of exploring at such depths only adds to the intrigue. What could be hiding down there, and what stories might these underwater anomalies tell if we could unlock their secrets? In our number 3 spot today, we have the Lake Michigan Stonehenges. In 2007, while scouring the depths of Lake Michigan for shipwrecks, archaeologists stumbled upon something they never expected: a circle of massive stones eerily similar to England's Stonehenge, sitting quietly beneath the waves. One stone even seems to have carvings that look like a mastodon, hinting that this site could be over 10,000 years old. It's a discovery that flips the script on what we thought we knew about ancient peoples in North America. Who built this underwater stone circle, and why did they go to such lengths? Was it a ceremonial site, an ancient calendar, or something entirely different? The fact that it's submerged adds another layer of mystery. Was it always underwater, or did rising water levels swallow it up over millennia? Researchers are still diving into these questions, no pun intended, but one thing is for sure: the Lake Michigan Stonehenges have turned a lot of heads and sparked imaginations about the hidden chapters of human history lurking just beneath the surface. In our number 2 spot today, we have the vitrified forts along Scottish rivers. Imagine hiking through the misty Scottish Highlands and stumbling upon ancient hill forts whose stones are mysteriously fused together, as if they were melted by some ancient flame. These are the vitrified forts of Scotland, found in various locations, including near rivers like the River Bogie, overlooked by the Tap o' Noth. The walls of these forts have been subjected to such intense heat that the rocks have partially melted and fused, a process known as vitrification. But here's the real kicker: how did people living thousands of years ago achieve temperatures high enough to cause this effect without modern technology? Was it a deliberate architectural technique to strengthen the walls, or perhaps a result of some ancient catastrophe or ritual? Archaeologists are still debating the purpose and method behind this prehistoric high-heat mystery. The vitrified forts remain silent sentinels, holding on to their secrets as tightly as their melted stones cling to each other, leaving us to wonder about the advanced capabilities or desperate circumstances of the people who built them. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the stone spheres of the Daquis Delta. Imagine trekking through the lush rainforests of Costa Rica's Daquis Delta and suddenly coming across hundreds of giant stone spheres scattered across the landscape. These aren't just any rocks, they're nearly perfect spheres, some small enough to hold in your hand, others massive enough to dwarf you at over 2 meters in diameter.
Crafted by the ancient Dakis culture between 700 and 1530 CE, these stones have completely baffled archaeologists. How did a civilization without modern tools carve such flawless shapes out of solid stone? And for what purpose? Were they astronomical instruments, symbols of status, or perhaps markers leading to something even more mysterious? Despite decades of study, no one has cracked the code behind these spheres. It's as if the Dakis people left behind a giant puzzle, daring us to piece together their secrets. Spot we have spiders. The Chernobyl exclusion zone is a place where, because of the strange nature of the environment and the radioactive material, things inside the zone are quite different than the surrounding areas, and this includes some really interesting animal mutations. I've talked about my hatred for spiders a lot on this channel, but to be honest, they keep doing kinda cool things, so I have to keep talking about them. Well, maybe this one is like less cool and more scary, but still, they deserved their spot. Spiders that are residing within the exclusion zone are of course radioactive, but it's not only the spiders that are now dangerous to touch, but it's also their webs. Spiders in Chernobyl are likely making radioactive webs, which is the stuff straight out of a comic book. These radioactive webs are also being woven in much different ways than they once were, which would suggest some sort of genetic mutation at play. Not only are the spiders now dangerous for non-radioactive animals to touch, but walking through their web is equally as dangerous to those who aren't thriving in the radiation. So not only do you have to watch out for regular old radioactive material, but now also the never-ending construction of radioactive webs. Great! In our number 9 spot today, we have the two-headed calf. Back in 2015, on a family farm in Florida, as a new little calf was born, those around her were in for quite a surprise. The calf, which was named Annabelle, was born with a mutation that has left her with 2 heads, 4 eyes, 2 mouths, 2 noses, and 2 ears. She was unfortunately too weak to stand up, which left her unable to suckle from her mother, but thankfully the family who owned the farm where she was born was devoted to doing all that they could for her. This meant that they would visit her regularly to feed her from a bottle. Unfortunately, however, there was little anyone, including veterinarians, could do to help this sweet little calf. The longest a two-headed calf has ever been recorded as living was just a short 40 days. It truly is quite a shocking mutation, and hopefully in the future scientists might be able to better figure out how to help so this doesn't happen, or potentially be able to extend the lifespan of calves born this way. In our number 8 spot today, we have barn swallows. After the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, it became clear that the effects weren't just seen in the ground, but also in the sky. The barn swallows in Chernobyl are one animal who have seen a change in their physical appearance that has lasted all the years since the nuclear meltdown. It is unclear why these birds have been affected greater than their land animal counterparts, or if these changes will ever reverse to their previous state, but here's what we are currently dealing with. The swallows appeared to have severely deformed beaks, disproportionate feathers, some had partial albinism, and they were seen to have much smaller brains. Of course, some of these issues are much worse than others, and I'm sure these changes have significantly affected their ways of life, but of course they continue to adapt as time goes on. It is sad that this human-made disaster has affected them in such a negative way, but the fact that they are still around really shows their adaptability and resilience. In our number 7 spot today, we have Donald the Duck. Alright, people are gonna have to get a little more creative with their baby animal names, because for this one we are talking about a duck named Donald. I mean, cute, but not very original for this super unique creature. Donald was born, or hatched I should say, by a family in Louisiana in 2014. Apparently when born, Donald was perfectly healthy with the exception of having 2 extra legs. This little dude was a lot luckier than some of the other animals on this list today, and it is said to have even been able to survive into adulthood, which is a nice change from some of the others we've discussed. Donald was treated by veterinarians at Louisiana State University who were said to have tried to bandage and brace one of his good legs in order to help him walk, but unfortunately this didn't end up working out too well. Sadly, although Donald lived a lot longer than some of these other creatures, his genetic mutation still didn't put him in the best position, and he passed away shortly after this treatment.
The Apollo 17 mission has been in the news recently over some newly leaked documents. Newly released Pentagon files say the crew reported seeing multiple unidentified objects in space during the return journey. The documents describe, quote, 3 dots in a triangular formation visible in a NASA photograph, along with what officials called a preliminary analysis suggesting it could be a physical object. But the real strange part comes from what the astronauts actually said while it was happening. Pilot Ronald Evans described seeing things drifting past the spacecraft, saying, quote, "Now we've got a few very bright particles or fragments or something that go drifting by as we maneuver." Then Harrison Schmitt reacted to what he was seeing outside the window, saying, "There's a whole bunch of big ones on my window, just bright. It looks like the 4th of July." The crew described multiple bright objects appearing at once, moving in different directions, sometimes clustering together, sometimes breaking apart. Commander Eugene Cernan also talked about it in the mission transcripts. According to the Pentagon summary, he described repeating flashing and rotating lights that went on for hours. At one point, he compared what he was seeing to an imposing train headlight and said the activity was constant enough that it even kept him from sleeping. The files also mentioned that Cernan believed what he was seeing wasn't just an optical effect, but something physical in space. And it continues, because the same document release includes earlier Apollo 11 debriefs where Buzz Aldrin also mentioned unusual sightings in space. He described seeing flashing lights while trying to sleep, saying, "I observed what I thought were little flashes inside the cabin, spaced a couple minutes apart." He even mentioned seeing a, quote, "fairly bright light source," which we tentatively ascribed to a possible laser. And finally, another infamous case. In February 1996, Space Shuttle Columbia was testing the tethered satellite system, a 12-mile cable meant to generate electricity by moving through Earth's magnetic field. After 5 hours and 19 kilometers of deployment, the tether snapped, and the satellite floated away. NASA's cameras stayed on, and what they recorded has been debated and analyzed to death in UFO circles ever since. The footage shows dozens of these bright, disc-shaped objects moving around both the shuttle and the tether. Some appear to pass behind the tether, and that is important to keep in mind, because that means they're not just up close at the lens. And using the tether's size as a reference, those objects are enormous, nearly a mile across, some of them. The official explanation came from astronaut Franklin Chang Diaz, who wrote the stuff off as debris. But a witness on the ground in Australia reported seeing 6 bright white objects that same night, one noticeably larger than the others, moving erratically as the shuttle passed overhead. So that's a pretty weird aspect to this case, not so easy to brush off. As always though, what do you all think?
In our number 6 spot today, we have the Chernobyl cows. This is another animal mutation that comes from the radioactive environment seen within the Chernobyl exclusion zone. The area around Chernobyl was known for its agriculture before the disaster, so of course that means that there were definitely a lot of cows that could be found. Different from cats and dogs in the area, since farm animals are not only expensive but also can be used as a source of income, many people took their farm animals with them as they were evacuating, but many of these animals had already been exposed to the radiation in some capacity, and while it didn't affect them right away, the newer generations saw much more of the effects. In 1989, many farmers began reporting birth defects in their animals, some being much more severe than others. As time went on, the cows became less mutated, but that doesn't mean that the effects went away. As the cows continued to graze on feed that was contaminated, the effects became more internal. This has led to completely normal looking cows near the exclusion zone beginning to produce milk that is toxic and not fit for consumption. This is just such another clear example of how even though the visible effects may have worn off, there are still lasting effects that we probably hadn't even previously considered. In our number 5 spot today, we have Baby Shark. Sorry for getting that song stuck in your head. All I gotta do is say it. So apparently, shark fetuses with 2 heads are becoming more common around the world. Who would have thought? According to experts, the mutation that leads to this trait is known as axial bifurcation, and it's seen not just in sharks but other animals as well, including humans. The question though is why it is starting to happen more and more often. Sadly, this mutation has quite a negative impact on the sharks, as it is unlikely that the sharks with this mutation will even live to see their own birth. For those who do survive until birth, it is highly unlikely that they will survive long in the wild. Right now, scientists are working hard to figure out what is causing this mutation specifically in sharks. The leading theories include overfishing, which is leading to a smaller gene pool and thus a higher susceptibility to genetic mutations, or even potentially things like metabolic disorders, pollution, or viral infections. In our number 4 spot today, we have Medusa. Medusa is a 2-headed snake who apparently comes with a steep price of $50,000. According to her owner, he was willing to pay that kind of price because he wanted her since the day she was born. The guy's really passionate about this snake, and the reason why, according to him, is that, quote, "The snake is perfect. Some other 2-headed snakes are beautiful, but they have a kink where their heads become become one. Medusa doesn't. It's as if she was meant to have two heads. I mean, it's a pretty nice thing to say about your snake. Medusa and her two heads is a result of identical twins. These twins split from one embryo to become two, but in Medusa's case, these twin embryos fused after splitting, which resulted in her very pricey but very unique appearance. In our number 3 spot today, we have Billy the goat. Just so we're clear, baby goats are called kids. I feel like that's important to clear up before we really dive into this one, and that is because on a farm in northeastern Croatia, one little baby goat or kid was born with some sort of a mutation that left him with 8 legs. This was obviously shocking, as of course it was expected to have just 4, but in addition to having twice the amount of legs, this little guy also had both male and female reproductive organs. These unique traits are said to have been a result of this goat sort of absorbing the remnants of an underdeveloped twin sibling. This is actually a thing not just seen in goats, but in other animal species as well. Unfortunately though, this can, and in this case did, prove to be fatal. This little guy, who was nicknamed Billy the Squid, likely didn't survive for longer than a week. In our number 2 spot today, we have Froggy. Okay, we've got some 2-headed animals on this list, but this one is taking the record because for this point, we have a 3-headed frog. Found in the waters of a seaside resort in Somerset, England, this unique creature named Froggy is said to have escaped captivity. Clearly, he's using all 3 of his heads, clever little guy. Not only does Froggy have 3 heads, but he also has 6 legs, and the culprit behind this unusual scenario is said to be either just a birth defect or potentially a result of water pollution. Froggy was truly baffling to scientists, with one Tim Halliday even saying, quote, "I've never heard of a frog like this before. People have been reporting mutant frogs for 200 years, but to find one with 3 heads and 6 legs is very rare. Seems as though Froggy really is 1 in a million." In our number 1 spot today, we have tuskless elephants. So you know how there are those terrible people who hunt huge, gorgeous animals for no reason at all other than to steal their ivory tusks in order to make a profit? Well, those people may have just caused a genetic mutation in elephants that might just end up kind of protecting these extraordinary creatures. More than 20,000 African elephants are killed every year just for their tusks alone, leaving their bodies behind. Decades and decades of illegal poaching of these animals and the constant killing of tusked animals means that from an evolutionary standpoint, not having tusks is certainly more advantageous. Elephants without tusks is a hereditary trait that is caused by 2-tooth genes. Tuskless elephants are more likely to survive because they aren't being hunted as often, which means that this trait is being passed down more often. In fact, it is thought that the number of female African savanna elephants without tusks rose from 15% to 51%. I also only mentioned females because apparently in males, the tuskless gene is lethal. Scientists predict that this change is so significant, even as poaching eases, this is likely a change that will still be seen for generations, which could have an absolutely devastating impact on the future of elephants.
Out in the desert near Saqqara, cut deep into the bedrock, there's an underground site that doesn't get nearly enough attention. The Serapeum is a long set of tunnels, and inside them are some of the largest stone containers ever found in Egypt. Solid granite sarcophagi, heavy as hell, each one weighs up to 70 tons. Just moving something that heavy into an underground tunnel would be an enormous task today, let alone thousands of years ago. They were used to bury Apis bulls, animals that were considered living representations of the god Ptah, treated almost like royalty. When one died, it got a formal burial inside one of these giant boxes. The tunnels are narrow and low in places, which makes it even harder to picture how these sarcophagi got in there. Some sections were clearly cut specifically to move the boxes through, but the exact method they would have used is still something researchers argue about. With the tools they had at the time, it would have been a massive undertaking. Parts of the site are open to visit, definitely a site that I would be adding to my list if I'm ever lucky enough to go to Egypt. Underneath the Giza Plateau, way below the pyramids, there's this underground structure called the Osiris Shaft. It's not just one chamber, it's more like a vertical stack of levels carved straight down into the rock, rooms sitting at different depths as you go lower. The name comes from Osiris, the Egyptian god tied to death, the afterlife. Inside you got this mix of spaces. Some are carved cleanly into the rock. Others are partially flooded because groundwater keeps seeping in at the lower levels. Researchers have also found stone sarcophagi and carved niches inside some of the rooms. The problem is access. People have known about it and studied parts of it over the years, but getting all the way down is not easy. Like I said, there's water filling sections of it, and some areas just are not stable enough to really explore safely. But most archaeologists think that this didn't start as one finished design. It probably began as something smaller, maybe a tomb, and then got expanded and modified over time as different layers were added. Even now, though, there are parts of it that haven't been fully explored. Tutankhamun's tomb is one of the most famous archaeological finds in history. But even with all the attention, there is still some mystery. In 2015, researchers used ground-penetrating radar to scan the walls inside the burial chamber. The scan suggested there might be empty space behind two of those walls. That got people talking pretty quickly, because one of the ideas that came up was that there could be another chamber back there, possibly even connected to Queen Nefertiti. Unfortunately, that part has never been proven. More scans were done in 2016 and again in 2018, and instead of clearing things up, there were just more questions. Some teams said they still saw signs of possible voids. Others said they didn't really see anything convincing at all. A lot of it comes down to how radar readings behave when they pass through thick stone, and how different researchers interpret the same results in different ways. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities said there wasn't solid evidence for hidden chambers. Other researchers were still convinced that it couldn't be ruled out entirely, though. In 2023, researchers announced they'd found a corridor inside the Great Pyramid that had been sealed off and completely unknown for more than 4,500 years. It was found using scanning technology. The corridor is above the pyramid's main entrance, about 9 meters long, with a triangular ceiling, a design that helps spread the weight of everything pressing down from above. That same approach was used in other parts of the pyramid, but this particular passage, they'd never found it before. The main theory is that it was just an empty space designed to take pressure off that section, but there's also the possibility that it connects to something else further in that hasn't been found yet. Nobody's physically gone in, there's no hidden room or artifacts. All they know for sure is there is a passage, one that's been sitting there completely unknown for thousands of years. Similarly, in 2017, scientists confirmed there was a massive hidden space inside the Great Pyramid that nobody had known about. The technique they used is called muon scanning. Muons are tiny particles that constantly fall from space, and they pass through solid rock, but they don't behave the same way through everything. Dense stone slows them down differently than open air does. So by tracking how they move through the pyramid, researchers could get a picture of what was inside without cutting into anything. And what they found was a large empty space above the Grand Gallery, one of the main interior corridors, at least 30 meters long, one of the biggest unknown spaces ever detected inside the pyramid. Multiple researchers from Japan and France working on something called the Scanned Pyramids Project all came to the same conclusion. The space is definitely there. Nobody knows is what it was built for or whether it connects to anything else. Nobody's gone in. Problem is, it's sealed inside solid stone, so actually opening it up, that would risk damaging the pyramid, and they don't want to do that, obviously. So everything researchers know about it comes from scan data.
In April 1979, an explosion occurred at a secret Soviet bioweapons facility in the city of Sverdlovsk. A plume of anthrax spores was released into the air. It drifted downwind over the city's southern districts. Within days, people started dying. The official death count was 66, but the real number was almost certainly higher. The Soviet government immediately blamed it on contaminated meat. They confiscated hospital records. They bulldozed the homes of the dead. They maintained the meat story until 1992, when President Boris Yeltsin finally admitted the truth. It was a bioweapons accident at a facility that should have never existed. The lab was permanently dismantled. Scientists were reassigned, and for 13 years, everyone involved looked the world in the eye and said it was just some bad beef. From the 1940s to 1989, a top-secret British facility called Porton Down conducted chemical weapons testing on its own soldiers. This is not ancient history. This ran until the year Taylor Swift was born, which is honestly a very weird way to measure history. Thousands of servicemen were told that they were participating in research to find a cure for the common cold. Instead, they were exposed to sarin, VX, and other nerve agents. In 1953, a 20-year-old Royal Air Force engineer named Ronald Madison died during a sarin exposure test. He was one of the youngest casualties of the program. The Ministry of Defense covered it up for decades. An inquest in 2004 finally ruled his death unlawful. Porton Down still exists, but live human testing of chemical agents stopped. Publicly, at least. Which is the kind of sentence I hate having to end with, but here we are. Between 1945 and 1947, researchers working on the Manhattan Project injected small amounts of plutonium directly into the bodies of 18 American hospital patients. They did not tell the patients what they were doing. They did not ask for permission. The patients were in hospitals for other reasons: broken bones, routine treatments, and the scientists simply added the plutonium to their IVs. They wanted to see how plutonium moved through the human body. They tracked it in excrement, in tissue samples, in autopsies. When investigative journalist Eileen Wellsome uncovered the experiment in the 1990s, it triggered a national scandal. The government settled a class action lawsuit, and President Clinton issued a formal apology in 1995. The research was permanently shut down, but the data collected from those 18 people, data gathered without a single signature on a consent form, was still being cited in radiation safety guidelines for decades. After World War II, scientists at Los Alamos kept a 6.2 kilogram sphere of plutonium. It was originally meant for a third nuclear bomb, but the war ended before it was used. So they started running what were called criticality experiments, basically pushing the plutonium right to the edge of a nuclear chain reaction, then backing off at the last moment. In August 1945, physicist Harry Daghlian was working alone at night. He dropped a tungsten carbide brick onto the core. There was a blue flash, he absorbed a massive radiation dose, and died 25 days later. Less than a year after that, in May 1946, physicist Louis Slotin was demonstrating the exact same type of experiment to colleagues. He was using a screwdriver to keep two halves of a beryllium reflector apart. The screwdriver slipped, the reflector closed, blue flash, Slotin felt heat in his hands and tasted acid in his mouth. He was dead 9 days later. 7 other people in the room survived, but several developed radiation-related cancers years later. 2 deaths from the exact same plutonium sphere in under a year. After Slotin, Los Alamos permanently banned all hands-on criticality experiments. No one has done one since. I don't know, maybe, just maybe, holding a nuclear reaction open with a screwdriver was not the best move ever.
During the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II, the Japanese Imperial Army operated a secret biological and chemical warfare research unit called Unit 731. Under the command of General Shiro Ishii, Unit 731 conducted experiments on prisoners of war and civilians that are among the most disturbing in all recorded history. They exposed victims to frostbite to study the effects of extreme cold on human tissue, freezing limbs solid, then testing different methods of thawing, including open flame, hot water, and cold water immersion to determine which method preserved the most tissue. Many victims lost limbs, many died. The unit also conducted vivisections, forced infections, and weapons testing on living human beings. After the war, the United States granted Ishii and his researchers immunity from prosecution in exchange for their research data. The full extent of what was done was buried for decades. Ishii never faced trial. He died of natural causes in 1959, and I don't know, I genuinely don't have any kind of joke or anything for this one. Before there was MK Ultra, there was Artichoke. Approved in 1951, Project Artichoke was the CIA's first formal program for experimenting with interrogation techniques, and it was more aggressive than anything that came after. The project's mandate was to determine whether a combination of drugs, hypnosis, and and psychological coercion could be used to force subjects to reveal information against their will and then forget they had revealed it. The CIA tested a multitude of mind-altering illicit substances and experimental combinations on both willing and unwilling subjects. They explored whether hypnosis could be used to make someone commit an act they would normally find morally repulsive. The project specifically targeted prisoners, foreign nationals, and suspected double agents. Records indicate that at least one subject lost their lives during an artichoke interrogation. The full scope remains classified. Artichoke was absorbed into MK-Ultra in 1953, but the techniques developed under Artichoke became the foundation for everything that followed. Between 1946 and 1948, U.S. researchers led by Dr. John Cutler deliberately infected approximately 1,300 Guatemalan prisoners, psychiatric patients, and soldiers with syphilis and other sexually transmitted diseases. They wanted to study the effectiveness of penicillin as a preventative treatment. The subjects were not told what was being done to them. They were not asked for consent. Some were infected through direct inoculation, others were infected by being provided with infected sex workers, and at least 83 people died as a result. When the study ended, the results were buried. They stayed buried for over 60 years. While MK-Ultra was testing drugs on people, MK Naomi was stockpiling weapons to kill them. In 1949 to 1970, the CIA and the U.S. Army Biological Warfare Laboratories operated a joint program to develop and maintain a covert stockpile of biological weapons for assassination and sabotage. The program maintained cultures of anthrax, smallpox, tuberculosis, and other lethal pathogens. They developed delivery systems including poisoned pens, contaminated handkerchiefs, and specialized spray devices designed to kill or incapacitate specific targets without leaving evidence. MK Naomi was reportedly used in at least one attempted assassination against Congolese independence leader Patrice Lumumba, though the biological weapon was apparently never successfully deployed. During apartheid, the South African Defense Force ran a program at a military hospital outside Pretoria from 1969 to 1987. Between 900 and 1,200 LGBTQ+ service members were identified, arrested, and forced to undergo treatment designed to cure their homosexuality. The treatments included electroshock therapy, hormone treatments, and in some cases, forced surgical gender reassignment operations performed without genuine consent. Patients who couldn't be cured were given medical discharges that destroyed their military careers and made them unemployable. When apartheid ended, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission heard testimony from survivors. Levin fled to Canada, was later convicted of sexually assaulting patients in his private practice, and was sent to prison, but not for what he did to hundreds of soldiers under military authority. For that, nobody was ever held accountable.
For hundreds of years, nobody even knew these passages existed. The Great Pyramid has a room called the Queen's Chamber. Back in 1872, a British engineer named Wayman Dixon found two narrow shafts hidden behind the walls. They're only about 8 inches wide, way too small for a person to fit through, and for over a century, nobody had any idea where they went. Then in 1993, a German engineer named Rudolf Gattenbrink sent a small robot into one of them. It went for more than 200 feet before it hit a tiny limestone door. The stone slab had 2 copper fittings on it, almost like handles. Nobody expected to find something like that down there. In 2002, another robot drilled through it. On the other side was a small open space, and then another door further in. A follow-up mission in 2011 got clearer pictures past the first door and spotted red markings on some of the stones, but the passage just ended at another wall. Over 4,500 years later, nobody agrees on what these shafts were actually for. Some think they were symbolic, tied to the pharaoh's journey after death, but the thing nobody can explain is why they were sealed off in the first place. The bent pyramid is really strange. It's kind of like a proto-Egyptian pyramid. It was built for Pharaoh Snefru around 2600 BCE, and it gets its name from how it looks. The sides of it go up at an angle, and then they suddenly shift partway up. One entrance is on the north side, another one is higher up on the west side, and each leads into its own set of corridors and rooms. Inside, the passageways are steep and some of the rooms are close to 50 feet tall, built by stacking layers of stone that gradually lean inward until they almost meet at the top. The whole layout is more complicated than other pyramids from the same period. Most researchers think the design changed during construction. The pyramid may have started developing problems, so the builders adjusted the angle on the outside and reworked parts of the inside as well. But why it ended up with two separate chamber systems, nobody's really nailed down. The whole thing feels almost like an experiment. Egyptian builders still figuring out how to do this at that point. And the inside of this pyramid makes that pretty obvious. It's not a polished, finished product. The smallest of the three Giza pyramids doesn't get a lot of attention. People have generally assumed for a long time that there wasn't much left to find inside it, but recently, teams scanning it picked up signs of possible empty spaces behind some of the granite blocks. Researchers are being careful not to overstate things. An odd reading on a scan, it doesn't automatically mean that there's a secret room, but it could be just a gap left during construction. Nothing's been confirmed. Still, it's a pretty big deal. People have assumed for generations that the pyramids had already given up everything interesting, but that keeps turning out not to be true. Whether these spaces end up being something major or just how the pyramid was built, it is a reminder that even the most famous monuments in the world, they haven't been fully explored yet. The Step Pyramid in Saqqara is often described as Egypt's first pyramid, built around 2650 BCE. On the surface, it just looks like big stone steps stacked on top of each other, but go underground and it's a completely different situation. Below the pyramid, there's a massive network of tunnels, shafts, and chambers cut straight into the rock. It spreads out in multiple directions, and some put the total length of tunnels at several kilometers. Not all of it is safe to walk through today. The main burial shaft goes deep down to a chamber that was built for Pharaoh Djoser. Around it are dozens of smaller rooms, some packed with goods meant for the afterlife. The thing that makes it unusual is how early it was. Builders were still learning how to work at this scale, and you can see that in the layout. Some corridors are planned out cleanly, others look like they were added later or just changed along the way. Parts of it are still blocked off today because it's just not stable enough to walk through safely. After everything that's been studied down there, people are still working out exactly what the full layout looks like though. Directly under the Great Pyramid, there's a room that looks completely out of place compared to everything above it. The chambers higher up have smooth walls, clean lines, at least perfectly placed blocks. This one has none of that. The walls are rough, the floor is never leveled, there's no decoration, there's no finishing work, it's just like bedrock with a room carved into it. It's usually called the subterranean chamber. You get there through a passage that descends from the pyramid's entrance. The chamber sits at the bottom, and past it are some smaller tunnels that are even harder to get into. Nobody agrees on why it exists. One theory is that it was supposed to be the burial chamber originally, and then at some point the plans changed and everything moved up into the pyramid itself. Another idea is that it was used during construction as some kind of anchor point for getting the measurements right above ground. Neither one is solid evidence behind it though. It just doesn't fit with the rest of the pyramid. The room looks unfinished. Thousands of years later, researchers still don't know exactly why.
Once the first pentacork showed up, you'd think the shock would wear off, but it didn't. CERN kept collecting data, and the data kept throwing out new combinations. In 2022 alone, LHCb announced a whole set of new exotic particles. 4 quark versions, more 5 quark versions, again, configurations nobody had seen before. They went through enormous amounts of data, checked everything multiple ways, and the particles kept showing up. Now, the force that holds atomic nuclei together was supposed to be one of the better understood things in physics, but every new exotic particle that shows up kinda shows that it's more complicated than scientists thought. Quarks can apparently arrange themselves into all sorts of combinations that nobody thought was possible before. When the universe began, it should have made equal amounts of matter and antimatter. Matter and antimatter destroy each other on contact. They just annihilate into energy. So if everything started out equal, it all should have wiped itself out. Nothing would exist. Obviously, that didn't happen, or you wouldn't be watching this video. I wouldn't be here making it. Matter won by a little bit, and that little bit is everything that exists. Nobody really knows why. CERN has been trying to find out by looking for tiny differences in how particles behave compared to their antimatter versions, and they found differences. The problem is those differences are way too small. They don't come close to explaining the scale of the imbalance we actually see in the universe. Other experiments at CERN have tested whether antimatter at least responds to gravity differently. Maybe that was the missing piece. Apparently not. It falls exactly the same way normal matter does. So we know matter and antimatter behave slightly differently in certain ways, we just can't figure out how those differences add up to a universe full of matter and basically no antimatter. Almost everything the LHC creates falls apart almost instantly, but some theories predict particles that could survive much longer, long enough to actually travel through the detector or even get stuck inside it and break down well after the collision. Seconds later, maybe minutes. CERN's built specific searches for these, looking for particle activity that shows up in the wrong place, so things that appear out of nowhere inside the detector with no obvious cause. So far, nothing's been confirmed. The standard way of analyzing collisions is built around the assumption that everything decays almost immediately, right at the collision point. If particles exist that don't do that wander through the detector or linger inside it, the normal methods they use to analyze this stuff just wouldn't work. They just miss them. There is a proposed detector called Methuselah that would sit on the surface above CERN, specifically designed to catch these kinds of particles if they exist. And sure, nothing I'm talking about here has actually been discovered, but the fact that something like that is being proposed at all is pretty cool. In 2011, a group of physicists thought they might have broken one of the most fundamental rules in physics, that nothing can travel faster than light. They were firing a type of particle called a neutrino from CERN in Switzerland straight through the Earth to a detector in Italy. Neutrinos can pass through solid rock, so the journey isn't a problem for them. The team was just measuring how long the trip took. When they looked at the results, the neutrinos were arriving early. Not by much, about 60 billionths of a second, but if that was real, those particles were moving faster than light. And if that was real, a huge chunk of physics was wrong. They published their findings and asked other researchers to help them figure out what was going on, because this was a huge deal. For months, nobody could find the problem. But eventually, someone found it. Okay, this is a bit anticlimactic, but a cable in the timing equipment wasn't fully connected. That tiny loose connection was throwing the timing off just enough to make the neutrinos look faster than they were. Once it was fixed, the results came back normal, but hey, for a short while, this was incredibly exciting. LHCb has been watching how certain heavy particles break down, looking very closely at what comes out. The theory predicts that two specific types of lighter particles, electrons and their heavier relatives, muons, should appear at roughly the same rate in these decays. But the data kept looking slightly off. Muons were showing up less often than they should, not by a lot, but consistently across multiple different experiments over years. Physicists started drawing up models for what kind of undiscovered particles could be causing it. Then more data came in, and by 2023 the numbers had drifted back towards what the theory predicted. The anomaly seemed to have faded. It might have been nothing, but that's gotta be confusing and frustrating. You watch a pattern in the data for years, you write papers about it, try to figure out what it means, and then you find out it could just be faulty data. The LHC doesn't just smash individual particles together. In some runs, it smashes large atomic nuclei into each other. The energy packed into collisions like that is so extreme that the temperature briefly reaches something in the range of trillions of degrees. The core of the sun is around 15 million degrees, so these collisions are many times hotter than that. At those temperatures, the matter we know basically stops existing in the form we know it. The particles that make up atoms come apart and you get this hot soup of the most basic stuff there is. As I mentioned at the top of this video, that's the same state the universe was in during its very first moments after the Big Bang. A machine built by people sitting underground in Switzerland, of all places, is briefly creating conditions that haven't existed since the universe was a fraction of a second old. That is just insane. Mind blown.